Hello, my people. I am forever fascinated by the stories you send me of the weird things that happen seemingly every day to somebody on this planet. So today, we have loaded up a bunch of your stories just to remind you of the crazy world we are living in. I hope you enjoy them as much as I do. This subscriber story comes from our very avid fan named Deb, and the story is about something that happened years ago to her brother Frank when she and her family were living in the Pacific Northwest. Now, Frank was a straight A student, a genius in his own right. But as a junior, he decided parties were just too cool and his attendance was a must. So on this fateful Friday night, just before 11 p.m., he slips out his bedroom window and into the night. He's walking along the deserted country highway, noticing a car approaching from behind him. He ducks into the trees, waiting for the car to pass. This repeats a few more times, and he decides, screw this, I'm going to walk through the trees. After walking about a mile through the forest, Frank is realizing that in his effort to avoid trees and such, his path is not as straight as he believed, and he has strayed quite a distance into the forest from the road. Just then, he spots a faint light to his side. While still walking, he turns his head to get a better look at the light and bumps into something warm. Something that breathes heavily and shakes uncontrollably. He turns forward again to discover he's walked right into a deer's hind end. And he just stands there with his mind spinning, wondering what on earth is happening? Why is this deer just standing here, and why didn't it run when I bumped into it? Then he focuses on its face. It's staring straight ahead, unblinking. So Frank follows its gaze. To his horror, he sees a figure straight from a nightmare. It's so pale, it seems to emit a soft glow. It appears to be a cross between a human and a praying mantis. Long, oddly bent arms and legs. Dark, soulless black eyes, so widely spaced they are almost on the sides of its head. It starts to produce a low, rhythmic clicking noise, and Frank hears noises behind him to his left and his right. He is standing there as frozen as the deer. But then the creature turns its head almost 180 degrees, staring at him, and this scares him out of his trance. He slaps the deer's behind and yells for it to go, go, go! The deer bolts, and Frank spins around, heading for the road. He's crashing into trees and thorns and heavy brush, but he keeps pushing through because he understands his life depends on it. However, in the dark, he doesn't spot a small hole in his path, and his foot goes crashing right down into the hole, and Frank hears the snap of his ankle. But even that doesn't halt him. He hears that clicking sound approaching him from several directions just behind him. He breaks through the tree line at last, limping into the middle of the road. He turns toward the forest, standing there trying to catch his breath as he hears these creatures all screeching and clicking. He's so scared that he doesn't even register the headlights coming straight at him. Luckily, yet not so luckily, it's his dad, and he's furious. Frank dives into the truck fast and slumps to the floorboard, sobbing. His dad is so stunned that he just stares at Frank, asking repeatedly, "What's happening?" Eventually, in a scream filled with terror, Frank yells, "Go! Just go!" His dad shifts the truck into gear, his foot on the gas, just as he sees a white face peeking out of the brush next to the truck. Needless to say, he floors it and reaches home in record time. Deb is awakened by the chaos when they arrive home. His dad starts shouting at his mom to go get the first aid kit and to get an ice pack. And it isn't long before they figure out that Frank's ankle is broken and take him to the ER. Deb had never heard of crawlers before, and it wasn't until years later that she started reading similar tales on the internet. She always believed him, though. You can't fake that kind of terror. And Frank never spoke of it again to the day he died, afraid that if he did, it might come back. If you are enjoying this journey into the strange and terrifying, please do us a solid by hitting that like button. That one tiny action may not seem like much, but it is a powerful way to ask YouTube to give a little channel some love. Now, back to the stories. This super strange story comes from our subscriber named Rodolfo about what happened over 60 years ago to his father, Rudolph. The story takes place back in the 1960s in the northern countryside of Costa Rica in a rural town called Platanar, when Rudolph is 14 years old. Back then, the town doesn't have any electricity. The main road, which sees very little actual car traffic, is made of stone, not pavement. And there are only a few houses here and there, usually a good 100 yards apart from each other. Because of the lack of electricity, once it gets dark, people use candles or kerosene lamps to light their houses. They have battery-powered flashlights, but they usually only use those for things like night hunting or when they have to venture outside for longer distances where kerosene lamps aren't practical. Rudolph's grandmother, Tessa, is a devout Catholic woman who has some figurines of different saints that she prays to every day and keeps a kerosene lamp continually burning for them as kind of a perpetual adoration, and would never forgive herself if the light ever went out. So one night, when the kerosene lamp is low on kerosene, she starts to panic. She calls Rudolph and tells him, "Take this money and grab the flashlight. Go as quick as you can to the convenience store and get more kerosene before the store closes." Rudolph hates making these runs, especially at night, because the neighboring farmers down the road have these vicious dogs that scare the crap out of him. But in those days, kids obeyed their elders. So he does what he's told and heads out for the convenience store. The store isn't that far, only about a mile, but Rudolph's on foot. He walks in the middle of the gravel road, hoping that it will give him a few extra seconds of warning if any of those dogs are in a bad mood today. The moon is out, but there are clouds as well, so it's kind of going in and out. And despite the fact that he didn't want to go to begin with, he makes it to the store and buys the kerosene without any issues. However, on his way back home, things get weird. As he's walking, Rudolph has to walk in front of the property of a woman alleged to be a witch. Rudolph couldn't care less about this lady and whether she's a witch or not. He always just kind of figured that her bad reputation was just gossip from the townspeople who have nothing better to do. Rudolph isn't worried about fairy tales of witches. He's worried about those damn dogs. So his mind is not on anything remotely paranormal. Every fiber of his being is on high alert for those dogs. But as soon as Rudolph walks by the so-called witch's house, his flashlight, which had fresh batteries, dies on him. This leaves him in the middle of this rural road in pitch darkness. He tries to turn the flashlight on and off again a few times, but that doesn't work. Still dark. So he waits a minute or two so his eyes can adjust to the dark. He's pretty close to home, maybe a couple 100 yards away, and he knows that road like the back of his hand. He thinks to himself, well, I'm almost home now. I'm pretty much past the worst part of it, so I might as well just keep going, and starts off again towards home. To Rudolph's surprise, however, he runs into a tall, barbed wire fence. He immediately thinks, how did I get that far off the road? As he's standing there trying to figure out what in the hell is going on, The clouds move away, allowing the moonlight to light up the ground around him. Now, Rudolph can see more clearly how tall that fence is. It's at least 25 feet high. But it's not just the height that freaks him out. He also realizes that he is surrounded by this fence in all directions. He's trapped in a square jail of barbed wire. He takes a quick look to his right and notices he's still on the road. He never strayed from the road like he initially thought. But now he's standing in front of the witch's house. And he's standing there for a bit, not really knowing what to do, when, as luck would have it, he hears a car coming down the road from behind him. As soon as the headlights from that car hit the spot where Rudolph is standing, the barbed wire disappears. Rudolph takes off for home as fast as he humanly can, using the lights from the car behind him to light his way. Once he gets home and calms down, he checks his flashlight. He discovers that the batteries have been switched, so the positive and negative polarities are switched around. Years later, when the witch woman dies of old age, the paranormal events that people reported in this rural town suddenly cease. Coincidence? This next story is actually our very first viewer submission. So a huge thank you goes out to MJ for sending us this one. Her encounter unfolds on June 23rd, 2022. MJ and her daughter-in-law are traveling from Boise to Trinity Hot Springs in Idaho. And they're having a great time, chatting and laughing and enjoying their little road trip. And as they approach Mountain Home, Idaho, there are 3 exits leading into town, and they need to take the second exit to reach the hot springs. As they're chatting and driving, they pass the first exit, and in the blink of an eye, they find themselves beyond all 3 exits, driving in the desert. MJ says, "How did we miss our exit?" MJ has taken this road a number of times and isn't likely to miss a whole exit, much less 2. She glances at the time and 20 minutes have passed. How did 20 minutes go by in the literal blink of an eye? Needless to say, she's a little freaked. So they turn around, double back to Mountain Home, and take the second exit to reach Trinity Hot Springs. For the rest of the drive, the 2 hardly speak. MJ is totally lost in her head. She's an intuitive therapist with the ability to guide her clients through regressions into past and present day experiences. So she's determined to figure out what happened to them. Once they get to Trinity Hot Springs, MJ puts herself into a hypnotic state. As she regresses, her mind opens to that span of lost time. She finds herself standing in a void, flanked by 2 tall gray beings, each gripping her and her daughter-in-law's arms. They walk through an opening into a larger room that reminds MJ of an anatomy lab. There are dozens of naked human bodies on tables, contorted in various horrific positions, with tall gray beings working on them, and smaller beings moving around like little assistants for the taller ones. They continue to move through the room, past the tables, to the front. Standing before MJ is a red being who looks like a stereotypical representation of the devil, with 2 gray aliens flanking it on either side. And MJ asks it, "What right do you have in taking me? You carry no rights to perform this." The red being curls an evil-looking smile to reveal extremely sharp, pointed teeth. It sneers and laughs at her. MJ feels a telepathic reply.
"You have no power here."
She replies, "On the contrary, I do." She raises her hand and places it over the red being's chest, as it just watches her with curiosity. MJ commands, "Take me back now," and moves her right hand from the center of its chest to the outside. As she does, she sees its chest wall shift to the left side under its skin, as if her forceful movement dislodges the heart, lungs, and anything else under its skin. The red being's eyes widen and it emits a piercing, frightening scream.
Put her back! Put her back! Put her back!
The tall, docile beings on either side of MJ spring into action and grab her arms. They start escorting her somewhere so fast that at first she's walking, then she's running, and then she's being dragged from that place. She can hear the echo of
Put her back!
2 more times before the doors close and they are in the void once more. That's when MJ awakens just outside Mountain Home in the middle of the desert, having passed the 3 exits. She looks at the clock and 20 minutes have passed. There's no way it would take 20 minutes to drive from one exit to the other, even if she wasn't conscious. The memory of that red being's scream, the only time it actually spoke verbally, still echoes in her ears. This experience leaves her stumped and curious. MJ isn't sure if this makes any difference, but Mountain Home houses an Air Force base. She didn't see any ship or any irregular clouds, and as far as she can remember, the sky was perfectly clear. All she knows is that it definitely was from a different dimension. Clement and his dad lived on the Tohono O'odham Reservation in Arizona, and they need some wood to sell. Not a lot, just enough to put some food on the table and some gas in the truck. So they head out in Clement's dad's ancient 1970s Chevy pickup to a place in the reservation called the New York Thicket. This place has lots of mesquite trees ready for the picking and in high demand. So Clement and his dad spend the day filling the back of the pickup with wood, and they're just finishing up when the sun is starting to go down. As the mountain shadow settles over them, Clement notices that the air around them has become very still. The slight breeze that they'd had all day is gone. You know how when you travel down a dirt road on a very still day, the dust that's kicked up kind of hangs in the air like a fog for a long time, but if you watch it, eventually it kind of moves on. Well, this air has less movement than that. Completely still. In the distance, Clement hears what sounds like a scream. His dad stops, stares at the horizon, and tells Clement to get in the truck. He and his dad both scramble into the truck, and his dad starts pumping on the gas pedal, throwing out a few quiet but choice words, trying to get the truck to start. No good. They have to let it sit for another minute. Clement looks in the mirror to the area behind them and can see that the air has a thickness to it. And even though there's literally nothing there, Clement can see something within the air itself moving. He tells his dad, "I can see the air moving. Is that possible?" It's like the air itself has become solid and started to move in their direction. Clement can hear a chorus of yelling and screaming, getting louder, but coming from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Clement's dad says a prayer and turns the truck key one more time, and the engine roars to life. At the same moment, the air seems to form into shapes and bumps into the truck. Clement's dad stomps on the clutch, throws the stick into first, and takes off as fast as he can get that Chevy to go. He pushes Clement's head down onto the seat between them and tells him, "Keep your eyes closed and don't look no matter what." And keep in mind, Clement is just a kid at this time, so he is just terrified. He can feel his dad drive the truck off the trail that they're on as he's making his own path through the woods, swerving to avoid trees and ditches, desperately trying to get to the 2-lane blacktop as quickly as he can. Clement can feel his father's panic just as much as he can smell the gas and the dust all around them. He starts crying. But he's not scared because his dad is obviously scared, or because he doesn't know what's going on, but because he does. This phenomena is very well known to Clement's people. They call it dead air. As soon as his dad hits the blacktop and can speed up, he lets Clement sit back up again. Clement looks out the back of the truck and can still see the dead air moving on its own. The reason that the New York thicket has such an abundance of mesquite wood is because the people on the reservation don't go there. That area is not far from where the last ever battle between two Native American tribes, the Battle of Pima Butte, took place in the United States in 1857. The Quechan, Mojave, and Yuman troops were intent on wiping the Peepash tribe off the face of the earth. Under attack, the Peepash people send a runner to call on their allies, the Akimo O'odham, Clement's people, who send 2,000 fresh warriors to fight with the outnumbered Peepash. And together, they do some serious damage to fend off their attackers. But it is said that those who died in that battle have never given up the fight, that their spirits still haunt the land, occasionally manifesting as the dead air, waiting to attack either the Peepash or the Akimo O'odham people, still trying to finish the fight. Jerome, his wife, and his mother are in a car one summer night heading to Wisconsin from California when they drive past Mount Shasta. Jerome and his wife are in the front seat with his mother in the back. It's around midnight and it's pitch black outside. What little moonlight they should have had is completely blotted out by a bumper crop of June bugs. Millions of June bugs are hitting the headlights and hitting the windshield like hail in a rainstorm. You can't see more than 20 feet in front of the car. The speed limit is 55 miles per hour, but there's no way you can go that fast in a June bug storm. So Jerome slows down to about 30. They pass a cattle crossing next 5 miles sign. Jerome looks at his wife like, oh, great. Now we got to worry about that too, and looks back at the road. When he hears his wife scream, "Stop! Right now! Stop!" Jerome slams on the brakes, bringing the car to a screeching, June bug popping halt. Right in front of the car are about 20 jet black cows, just standing in the middle of the road. If he had waited just another half a second more to crush the brakes, there's a good chance they would not have lived to tell the tale. He looks to his wife and says, "Holy cow, it's a good thing you screamed because I didn't even see them coming." His wife says, "I didn't scream." Jerome looks at his mother in the back seat, who confirms nobody screamed. They all exchange weirded out glances. Jerome's wife starts to cry, and Jerome honks the horn to get the cows moving off the road. Jerome says he knows what he heard. He heard his wife screaming at him to stop the car. He says there's something strange about that mountain, but he is grateful to whatever it may be. Dan grew up in the 70s and 80s on a farm in the Midwest and had a normal childhood until he turns 14. Dan is already big on hunting, and every fall and winter would hunt the area coyote pack to help keep their numbers down. So he knows his way around a gun even at 14. One evening, he hears a commotion out in the pasture. Thinking it's the coyote pack getting up to no good, he loads his 12 gauge with buckshot, planning to just go out and fire around in their direction over their heads to scare them off. So he heads out into the dark with his 2 loyal dogs toward the pasture where he heard the ruckus. And as he nears the pasture fence, he can barely see what looks to be a really big black wolf crouched down in the tall grass on the other side of the pasture fence. But then it jumps. Dan's blood runs cold when in one jump, it not only clears the fence, but lands about 20 feet closer on Dan's side of it. It charges at him, alternating between 2 legs and 4, which makes it look like a toad, which just freaks Dan out even more. What is this thing? The only thing that pops into his head is that it must be what people call a hellhound. His dogs are going nuts trying to protect him, and this thing is closing in fast. Fast enough that Dan decides he doesn't have time to aim from the shoulder, so he lets off a round from his hip. Then he fires another round that hits the beast square in the chest. The direct hit sets the beast back a bit, but without missing a step, it turns 90 degrees and keeps running off into the darkness. Dan's muscles give way all at once, sending him to his knees as his dogs continue to circle around him, barking and growling, never leaving his side. All is quiet for a couple of years. Dan turned 16 and can now drive. So he loads his dogs up into the truck and heads out into the woods one night to his favorite riverbank hunting spot to do a little coon hunting. Parks the truck, gets out, lets the dogs out, and immediately hears growling and screaming that sounds like an animal fight. Dan's oldest dog pees on the ground right in front of him and slinks off to hide under the truck. When Dan sees what looks to him like King Kong bend down and pick up the same kind of huge wolf thing he saw 2 years earlier and throws it against a tree. The wolf, or what he would later learn is a dog man, bounces off the tree and falls into the river. King Kong then reaches up about 16 feet, rips a branch that's about 8 inches in diameter off the tree, turns it around and is holding it like a club, jumps down the riverbank and takes off in the same direction that the dog man is headed. And just like that, both beasts are gone. Later in life, Dan would become close to an Indian woman who is friends with his mom, and because she has no kids herself, kind of takes Dan and his siblings in as her own. By this time, Dan has actually heard about Bigfoot and Dogman and knows that they are the beasts he saw both of those nights. She tells Dan stories of Bigfoot, or what her people call the wild people. Interestingly enough, her people have never heard of a dogman either, leaving Dan to wonder if they're perhaps some kind of modern creation. Anyway, Dan actually has a few more sightings of Bigfoot, who he just calls Big Boy, in his area, though nothing nearly as dramatic and with years in between. But over those many years, Dan has learned that when Big Boy comes around, everything in the woods goes quiet. So he knows if the woods are quiet, don't go in there. This story is from Tracy, who sends us her story all the way from the UK. Now, I know a lot of you people think that they don't have dogmen across the pond, but this story just might change your mind. She's about 10 when the story takes place. One night, she's helping her mom babysit her 2 little nephews for her older sister, so her sister and brother-in-law can go out for dinner. We're going to call her sister Alice and her brother-in-law Ben. So Alice and Ben are driving home on this country road in the rain after their date night when they see 2 cars ahead on the side of the road. Looks like maybe somebody is having car trouble. Ben, being a farmer and a mechanic, decides to stop and see if there's anything he can do to help. He and Alice are in a Range Rover, so a little bit taller than the other cars. And as they pull up, Ben rolls down his window, but the people in the car do not. And that's a little weird, but okay. Ben shouts at them through their window, asking if they need any help. The people in the car just shake their heads and point. Ben can't see what they're pointing at, so he pulls the Range Rover ahead just a bit when he sees a mass of dark, wet fur down in the ditch. And Alice asks Ben, "What is it? It's a dog?" Ben says, "Well, it seems a little bit big for a dog." And since they don't have wolves in the UK, wolf never even comes to mind. Now, I guess it's not uncommon for sheep to wander off, fall into a ditch, and not be able to get back out. So Ben, being a farmer, thinks that that's got to be what this is. It's just a black sheep in the ditch. So he decides to get out and give the poor thing a hand. As he opens the door and steps out, the Rover's interior light comes on, catching the attention of the animal in the ditch. Ben's right. There is a sheep in the ditch, but it is the large, black, furry creature with the long snout eating said sheep that turns its head to look at Ben. The beast snarls a bit, showing its long, sharp white teeth as it produces this low, guttural growl that Alice and Ben can feel in their stomachs. And Ben is just transfixed on this thing's eyes when he hears Alice scream, "Shut the door!" That is all Ben needs to bring him back to reality. He jumps back in the Rover and locks the door. And then he looks around at the people in the other cars, and they're all just staring at this thing with their mouths hanging wide open. Alice says, "Let's get out of here." Ben doesn't need to be told twice. Alice says, "What was that?" But Ben doesn't really know how to answer as he's still processing it in his head. And finally he says, "I don't know. But did you see the size of its teeth?" And Alice wants to know, what was it doing in the ditch? Ben tells her there was a sheep in the ditch that it was eating. Must have thought I was after its dinner. When they get home, they told Tracy's mom all about it, but in kind of hushed tones. But Tracy was listening and heard the whole story. When she asked her mom about it later, her mom, whether out of disbelief or in an effort to deflect the scariness for her young daughter, just laughed the whole thing off. But Tracy knows for a fact that her sister and brother-in-law never ventured into that area again. When Katie's just 4 years old, she takes a trip with her dad from where she lives in Pullman, Washington, to see her brother in college all the way across the state in Vancouver, Washington. It's a pretty long trip when you're 4. And before you know it, it's time to get back in the car and go home. She and her dad are traveling at night on the trip back, but this is the 70s when a kid can actually lie down on the back seat and go to sleep. So that's what she does. Car rides are nice and quick when you're sleeping, and Katie's dad pulls into the driveway in seemingly no time at all. It's still night outside, and she's only 4, so Katie goes into the house and goes straight to bed, thankful for the chance to see her brother and for an uneventful trip home. Except that's not really what happened. When Katie goes back to sleep that night, the memories of that car ride come flooding back into her head. She'd been sleeping on the back seat of the car, but she wakes up when she feels the car start to slow down. And there's a yellow light shining down on her from something hovering above the car. She sits up and looks at her dad to see him falling asleep at the wheel. However, she can see that the wheel is still moving, like something else is in control of the car. Katie starts crying and shaking her dad, yelling his name to try to get him to wake up as the car kind of slows to a crawl and then stops. The light that had been above the car is still moving, and Katie watches it through the window and sees it land on the ground not far from the car. The bright light shining against the dark makes it impossible to see what is behind it. But what she can see is an open door where two tall, gray-skinned beings with yellow slanted eyes, just like the ones described by Betty and Barney Hill in their alien abduction account, come walking out. They assure Katie that they're not going to hurt her and lead her back through the door into what turns out to be a ship. The inside is a super pale blue, almost white, with a window that goes all the way around and blocks of the same kind of material coming up from the floor for seats. They take her to a room behind a wall to examine her. And Kitty can't remember the details of the examination, except that there was a lot of screaming and crying involved. And what she can remember feels like memories from outside the room. She can hear herself crying, but at a distance, like an out-of-body experience. When it's all over, the leader walks with her all over the ship, explaining what each different room is for, kind of like giving her a tour. And there are other beings as well, ones that look different than the tall gray ones. These are shorter with wider faces and black and white eyes. Katie's kind of confused by these shorter beings because they look like kids to her, but she knows that they're not. And she asks the gray leader, "Do you have any kids here?" And he answers her, "No, but there are where I am from," pointing out the window and up. Feeling much happier leaving than she was going in, with her fear being replaced with curiosity and fascination, Katie follows him as he leads her back to her car, and he lets her know that her dad will be waking up soon. And to her amazement, her dad wakes up, kind of groggy, starts the car, starts driving, and they just drive home. It's around midnight. Dan, who's just a kid, is heading home on his bike. The road that he's traveling is pitch black, no street lights, with dense forest lining both sides. He knows this road like the back of his hand. It's a little hilly, but it's not terrible, and occasionally there's a house breaking up the monotony of trees. One house along this stretch has always grabbed Dan's attention. Its driveway ends in a gate that has a floodlight so bright it illuminates the whole area like a miniature sun. Usually, Dan is grateful for this little bit of artificial daylight in the darkness, but not tonight. As Dan approaches the overly bright area, his eyes drift to the woods on his left. What he sees there stops his heart cold. Crouched on all fours is a creature that he can't even comprehend. Kinda looks like a dog, but its body is all wrong. The back end is way higher than the front. As Dan's brain screams, "That is not a dog!" his stomach just tanks, but before he can process what he's seeing, the creature starts charging right at him with insane speed. Panic pumps through Dan's veins. He starts pedaling his bike with a desperate intensity he has never known before. Behind him, he can hear its razor-sharp claws raking against the asphalt, getting closer every second. Against his better judgment, he can't help but look back, a decision he instantly regrets. In the moonlight, he catches a glimpse of this thing. It's massive, a hulking mass of muscle and fur. Dan whips his head forward again and pushes himself even harder. Suddenly, he feels something swipe across his back. Then a second time. The thing is trying and is obviously close enough to grab him. This near miss unleashes a final burst of adrenaline. He pedals harder and faster than he ever imagined that he could, the muscles in his legs burning. After what feels like an eternity, the sound of claws on the pavement begins to fade. The creature, for whatever reason, has given up the chase. But Dan does not slow down until he reaches this area that has a well-lit road where there's a store and a couple other buildings. Feeling like he's somewhat back to civilization, he relaxes a little and tries to process the nightmare he's just escaped. Unfortunately, that's not the end. At home, Dan can't shake the feeling of being watched. Every shadow outside his window freaks him out now. He thinks, is it back? Did it track me to my house? And for months afterward, Dan suffers from horrible nightmares. Even decades later, with the adult rational part of his mind insisting it had to have been some kind of hallucination, Dan cannot forget. To this day, the memory sends chills down his spine because deep down inside, he knows it was real. How does he know? It's the one thing he can never rationalize away. The dirt on the back of his sweater, left there by whatever swiped at him on that terrifying night. Being chased by a monster on a dark, deserted road is understandably terrifying. But what about when you're standing in a place that is full of people whose job it is to take care of you? The hospital. This story comes from Ivy's mom 330, but we'll call her Sarah. In 2009, Sarah is in the situation all of us dread, a loved one in the hospital. Her mom has been admitted, and Sarah, along with her siblings, take turns visiting 2 at a time. Sarah already had her chance to visit with her mom for a while, so now she's just hanging out in the waiting room while others have the chance. But she finally decides it's time to head back in and say goodnight before heading home for the night. The waiting room is down the hall a bit from the patient's room and the nurse's station, but she knows her way back to the room. As you leave the waiting room, the elevators are in front of you, and to the right, there are 2 big wooden doors that go to the ICU where her mom's room is. Sarah pushes open the heavy wooden doors, takes a few steps inside, and suddenly realizes something is very, very wrong. Instead of the circular layout and yellow walls and the central nurse's station, she finds herself in a long gray hallway. The walls are lined with closed doors, and between each door is what she can only describe as like a niche or a cubbyhole, but they're big enough for a person to fit inside. Now, Sarah's no stranger to weird experiences. At 62 years old, she's seen her fair share of the strange and mysterious. But whatever is happening right now is on a whole different level. As she's trying to make sense of her surroundings, Sarah sees somebody about 30 feet ahead. It's a boy, maybe 16 to 19 years old, standing in one of those niches on the right side of the hallway. He's skinny, wearing a hospital gown with shoulder-length dark hair that looks greasy or sweaty. Sarah keeps walking, and the boy keeps staring, peeking around the wall with this creepy grin on his face. When she's about 2 feet away, the kid suddenly lunges at her, hands raised and mouth open like he's trying to scare her. But the very next second, this solid, very much there boy simply vanishes. Gone. Poof! Like he was never there at all. Staying calm and cool, Sarah just stops and says out loud, "It's not nice to try and scare people." And she stops and thinks about what she just saw or what she didn't see. The boy's eyes were completely black, like pools of oil. No whites, no irises, just darkness. Now, Sarah has seen spirits before, but this is different. This boy seemed solid, real. And at the time, she'd never even heard of black-eyed kids. But something in her gut tells her not to turn her back on that hallway. So she backs up slowly until she reaches those wooden doors. When she steps back into the waiting room, her family's looking at her like she's lost her mind. Sarah waits for those doors to close, then opens them again. And just like that, everything's back to normal. Yellow walls, circular layout, nurse's station, the whole 9 yards. So the next time you're in a hospital and things suddenly don't look quite right, maybe think twice before you keep walking down that hallway. You never know who or what might be waiting for you. From the literal and figurative heart of civilization, we head back out to the deep, creepy forests of Florida, where our next story proves that sometimes you don't necessarily need to see it to believe it. When he was about 8 or 9 years old, Ben lived with his family in Plant City, Florida, not too far from Tampa, but far enough to still be pretty much in the middle of nowhere. They live in a converted double wide, surrounded on 3 sides by a wild tangle of palmetto, oak, and palm trees. Ben's room is an add-on room attached to the house later, which, because of the way it's attached, can only be accessed by a multi-tiered porch. One night, after everyone is asleep, a blood-curdling scream rips through the darkness from the nearby woods. It's a sound Ben has never heard before, but he's old enough to know it's not a coyote and it's not a panther. Then, complete silence. The only thing Ben can hear is the family's hunting dogs, usually fearless, whimpering on the porch. He listens for a while. He doesn't hear anything else. Eventually falls back to sleep. Fast forward a month or so, and Ben is asleep in his room again when he's jolted awake, gripped by a primal fear and feeling a weight on his chest. His TV's on, but the sound is muted, and judging by the slick preacher on the screen, he can tell it's pretty late. He hears movement on the porch outside his room. His super tough hunting dogs are whimpering again. Now, the porch has a window to the yard. Outside the window is a yard light that shines through the window. And even though the blinds are down, it's bright enough that he can even see the shadows of bugs flying around the light. Suddenly, his window goes dark as something massive steps in front of the porch light. But he can still see a sliver of light up in one corner of the window, so he knows it's not because the light went out. Ben sees the shadow step back and bend down to look inside. He sees the outline of an enormous head and shoulders with long clawed hands like a raccoon's. On the head are 2 vertical ears on either side like a Doberman. As it shifts to look around, it turns directly toward Ben's bed. The shadow shifts in the window again, and Ben can feel it looking directly at him. Terrified, he runs to get his dad, telling him there's a man on the porch. By the time his dad gets there to check it out, nothing's there, but the dogs are huddled in a corner. If whatever was out there was regular for the backwoods of Florida, those dogs would be going nuts trying to get at it. Takes Ben a little while before he sleeps in that room again. But he finally does, and life moves on. Fast forward about 10-12 years, and Ben is now a deputy in the sheriff's department. One night, even though he doesn't live there anymore, he and a buddy decide to take Ben's F-150 truck and go hunting on the property for coyotes. He parks the truck right at the tree line, and he and his buddy are in the back of the truck sitting on top of the cab, so they're maybe 6-7 feet off the ground. And they can hear a pack of coyotes moving in. Suddenly, and for no reason that Ben can figure out, the pack turns tail and runs off into the woods. That's when that same unnatural silence falls again. Shining a light into the trees, they spot eye shine about 10 feet back from the tree line and at a height that is higher than theirs. No big deal. They figure it's just a raccoon that shimmied its way up the tree. Ben turns off the light and the two men wait and listen for a few minutes. Not hearing anything, Ben turns the light back on and they see the same eye shine. But this time the eyes have moved 20 feet to the right, closer to the tree line, but still just as high and still in the trees, so they can't really see what it is. Both men are then gripped by this intense fear, and they decide it's time to go. They jump off the truck, jump into the truck, and leave as fast as they can. Today, as a 30-year-old deputy sheriff, Ben still vividly recalls the terror of both of those encounters. And though his job has exposed him to all kinds of terrifying situations, nothing compares to the primal dread he felt face to face with what he believes was a dogman. Why do these things always have to happen at night? Well, you know the saying, what happens in the woods stays in the woods. But what happens when high strangeness comes to visit a New England island? This encounter takes place sometime around 1986-1987. Eric and his best friend Steve, both around 11, 12 years old, are inseparable. Eric spends most of his summer at Steve's house on Harpswell Island, Maine, which is this island town broken up into sections connected by bridges. They know every inch of Harpswell, from its peninsulas to its beaches, like the back of their hands. They spend the long, warm days playing outside and wrestling with the neighborhood kids, but it's the nights that bring the real adventure. This particular evening, they watch their favorite show, Saturday Night's Main Event, which ends at midnight, and Steve's mom says it's time for bed. So they both do as they're told and head off to bed. But they don't go to sleep. They just lie in their beds waiting for Steve's parents to go to bed and fall asleep. When they finally hear the light snoring coming through the walls, they know the coast is clear and they quietly slip out of their beds. Being the ninja wannabes that they are, Steve grabs his prized dagger from its hiding spot, while Eric retrieves the meat cleaver he'd modified with a homemade handle. Ninjas always have weapons. They quietly open the window and climb out into the cool night air. The two boys make their way down the familiar one-lane road leading to the beach on Orr Island. The night is very still. All they can hear is crickets, which of course makes their whispering sound like shouting. They get to the beach and start skipping rocks on the moonlit water, talking about everything and nothing, reveling in their little boy rebellion. They hang out there for a little while until they decide, you know what, it's probably time to go back. It's probably about somewhere between 1 and 2 a.m. And the road home is dark except for a few street lights here and there. As they're approaching one of these pools of light, Eric nudges Steve, points ahead of them and whispers, "Hey, look." In the distance, they can see someone walking towards them. As they get closer, they realize it's a woman. The boys kind of look at each other, and Steve whispers, "What's a lady doing out here so late?" Eric shrugs, not taking his eyes off the approaching woman. As they get closer to the street light and to the woman, details start to come into focus that make both boys' hearts race. The woman is wearing a wedding dress. Her skin is pale, almost translucent, and her hair is jet black, hanging down around her face. Once the boys are directly under the street light, and the woman is now just a few feet away, they can see the hollow look in her eyes, the stillness of her features. A chill runs down Eric's spine. He turns to Steve to ask him a question, but before he can ask, they both look back and the street is empty. The woman has vanished into thin air. Neither boy moves or speaks. They just stare at the spot where the woman was standing just a few seconds ago. And then they look at each other and then look back at the empty street. "Did you?" Steve nods and ekes out a quiet, "Yeah." They stand there, frozen, trying to make sense of what just happened. There's nowhere she could have hidden. One side of the road is a steep embankment. The other is somebody's yard bordered with tightly packed hedges. If anyone had tried to run away, not only would the boys have seen them, but the night is so quiet, they would have heard them too. Freaked out, they double time it home, going back and forth between dismissing the incident and insisting that it really happened. They climb back through the window, hearts pounding, and lie awake for hours talking about what they saw. The next morning, Eric and Steve shuffle into the kitchen for breakfast. Steve's dad is already there drinking his morning coffee. As the boys mosey in, with a voice that's a mixture of amusement and disapproval, Steve's dad says, "So you boys went out again last night." Busted. Eric and Steve freeze, exchanging guilty looks. The jig is up, so they decide against even trying to hide it and just quietly nod their heads as Steve kind of says, yeah, avoiding looking at his dad because he's assuming he's in big trouble. His dad leans back, taking a sip of coffee, and says, "Did you have fun?" The boys look at each other again. Should they tell him? Steve decides to chuck caution to the wind and says, "We saw something, Dad." Eric chimes in, "A woman in a wedding dress." The floodgates open, and the boys launch into a non-stop tag team barrage, telling Steve's dad what they saw, how she vanished before their eyes. When they finish, they wait nervously for Steve's dad's reaction. To their surprise, Dad stays as cool as a cucumber. He sets down his coffee mug, leans forward, props his elbows on the table, and says, "You know, there's a story around here about a woman who died somewhere by the beach on her wedding night." The boys' eyes widen and Steve asks, "How long ago?" His dad shrugs, "Not sure exactly. Maybe 100 years ago, give or take." Eric and Steve look at each other, mouths hanging open and slowly turning into grins. Wow! Our first ghost. Cool. From land to sea, it seems nowhere is safe from the unexplained. Our next story takes us to the shores of New Brunswick, where a night of summer fun turned into a ghostly nautical nightmare. It's a warm July evening in 2022. A group of friends are gathered on the beach in New Brunswick, Canada, enjoying a classic summer night. Bonfire blazing, hot dogs and marshmallows roasting, and a cooler stocked with beverages. Our in-betweener, whom we'll call Brenda, and 6 of Brenda's friends have barely been there an hour when something catches their eye out on the water. And they're not the only ones who see it. Other people further down the beach are pointing and staring too. There, about 300 to 400 feet offshore, is a ship, but not just any ship. This one's completely engulfed in flames. As Brenda and her friends watch in disbelief, they start to make out details. They can see the bow and the stern clearly. And there's even some kind of figure on the front of the ship, but it's too far away to see what it is. Brenda can even see people running back and forth on the deck and can hear these awful, blood-curdling screams. Brenda and her friends are freaking out. One of her friends, we'll call him Dave, sprints to the car to get his phone, hoping to get a picture. But by the time he gets back, poof, the ship is gone, leaving nothing but dark water and a lot of stunned witnesses. But before you start thinking that Carnival Cruise Lines is about to get sued, and what the hell is Dave doing trying to get a picture instead of calling 911, this is not a modern day ship. This is the legendary Baie de Chaleur fire ship, also known as the Chaleur Phantom. And it's been around for generations. The Phantom ship pops up from time to time in Bathurst, New Brunswick, or across Chaleur Bay in New Carlisle, Quebec. Most of the time, it's described as an arc of light that shows up before a storm, but sometimes, like in Brenda's case, it takes on a much more dramatic form. Local legends say it appears as a flaming three-mast galley ship, similar to the ship on New Brunswick's flag. Some people even claim that if you dip your feet in the waters of Chaleur Bay, you can hear the screams of the burning passengers. Now, science types have tried to explain this away as everything from decaying vegetation to underwater natural gas releases to St. Elmo's fire. But ask anybody who's seen it, like Brenda, and they'll tell you this is something else entirely. Brenda hasn't been back to that beach since that night, but she's already planning her next trip. And this time, she's bringing a camera with a telephoto lens. Because if there's one thing we've learned here on the In-Between, it's that when the unexplained comes knocking, you'd best be ready. Well, that's about as dramatic of a message from the spirit world as you can get. Not all messages from the other side are as crazy as that one. Some of them are a little bit more subtle. The email for this story didn't say if we could use her name or not, so we're going to be on the safe side and call her Jennifer. Jennifer's parents were married for a long time. And for one of their anniversaries, her dad made her mom a beautiful grandfather clock, the traditional kind that chime every 15 minutes. When it was finished, he told her that he had left a message for her inside the clock, a message she was told not to read until after he had passed away. Her mom was so proud of her gift and the romantic message, she immediately told the neighbor, who happened to also be a really close family friend. But over the many years, her dad's labor of love stopped chiming. And about the time the clock turns 30-ish years old, Jennifer's dad passes away. But on the day the minister is due to come to the house to discuss the funeral arrangements, something weird happens. At 1 p.m., when the minister, who's running late, is supposed to be there, the clock chimes. Jennifer and her mom are stunned. This thing hasn't worked in forever, yet here it is, ringing every 15 minutes like nothing's wrong. And it keeps ringing every 15 minutes, just like it's supposed to, the whole time the minister is there. But the moment that he leaves, it goes nuts and starts randomly chiming. When Jennifer asks, "Do you think it's Dad?" Jennifer's mom, freaked out, runs to the neighbor's house and tells her everything. And that's when the neighbor says something that changes everything. "Did you find the message?" Jennifer's mom says, "What message?" So the neighbor reminds her about the message left in the clock for her to read after her husband has passed. Jennifer's mom runs back to the house where the clock is still chiming like crazy. They search the top of the clock and find the note. She opens it and reads, "Let time not erase the memory of my love for you." Along with the message is the year and Jennifer's dad's initials. As soon as they read it, the clock calms down, chiming normally again. They all have a good cry, and Jennifer's husband closes the clock back up. It chimes one more time, then just stops, and it hasn't made a peep since. This in-betweener would like to remain anonymous, so we're going to call her D and her sister J. The year is 2009, about 9 or 10 o'clock at night, and D, who's 22, and J, who's 32, they're driving to the Walmart in the next town on a late-night run. They live out in the country of Bridgeville, Delaware, surrounded by fields. It's nice, but Bridgeville doesn't have any stores open that late. D's driving her car up to the stop sign at the end of the small neighborhood road. Across the street is cornfield as far as the eye can see. She looks to the left before she starts to pull away from the stop sign to go right when she hears a big smack on one of her windows. She throws the car in park and both girls start looking around at the windows thinking that they must have hit an owl or a bat. Sounds funny, but stuff like that happens in the country. Neither of them see anything until they notice movement near the windshield wipers. Something with long limbs starts unfurling on her windshield. Dee and Jay are frozen in fear. On the windshield, they see something about 12 to 14 inches long, muted, sickly green in color with long legs and arms. The body looks emaciated, super skinny, and is segmented, with the first segment looking like a chest, moving up and down like it's breathing, and the second segment looks like a stomach area. The body is connected to a segmented neck with an oval head, almost like that of your standard gray alien. It has two large eyes that are black like a spider's eye, and a mouth. No nose, no ears. Behind it are thin wings that are made of 4 sections, 2 pointing up and 2 pointing down. Dee and Jay are both just sitting there in the dark, staring at something that appears slightly humanoid, but mostly bug-like, with alien-looking features. Then it starts screaming. It sounds like the creature from The Thing. Both of them start screaming as whatever this thing is on her windshield is turning its head, looking back and forth between Dee and Jay. This thing is intelligent. Its eye contact is terrifying, with a stare that goes right into Dee's head and makes Dee feel like it's trying to dissect her soul. But at the same time, she can't seem to look away. Her fight or flight kicks in and she starts trying to get her seatbelt off. Her house is just off to the left. She can see it. So her plan is to make a run for it, leaving her parked but still running car right in the middle of the road, and her sister along with it. But anything is better than staying right where she's at right now. Dee starts fighting with her seatbelt, which she can't quite seem to master because she can't take her eyes, or any other part of her brain for that matter, off of this creature. Jay sees that Dee's trying to make a break for it and grabs her arm, screaming, "Don't open the door!" They take their eyes off the creature to look at each other for the first time since this thing hit the car, and suddenly, the screaming stops. Their heads snap back to the windshield, and the creature is gone. They take a few deep, shaky breaths as Dee puts the car in drive, and the two continue on their way to Walmart in complete silence, like they're in shock. They get about 5 minutes down the road, and Dee says, "Did we just see what I think we did?" Jay says, "If you just saw a fairy hit the front of your car, then yes." Since that fateful night, Dee has tried to rationalize what they saw. She has looked into stick insects, praying mantis, luna moths, giant Dobson flies, but nothing comes close to what they saw that night. Both girls are convinced they encountered a fairy. Not a Peter Pan pretty pink fairy, but the old English ones that steal your baby and try to steal your soul. And who knows, maybe that chance meeting with the front of Dee's car not only changed Dee and Jay's life, but saved someone else's. Between that last story and this next story from our faithful in-between friends, Deb and Rich, you're never gonna want to go shopping again. Just this past summer of 2024, Deb and Richard are in Walmart near their home in Washington State. And they're just patiently waiting in line, waiting for the elderly couple in front of them to move up far enough so that they can put their stuff on the checkout conveyor belt. When the elderly man starts backing up slowly. Deb takes a look to figure out what's going on here. Why is this guy backing up? And she sees him not just backing up, but trying to pull his cart back with both hands, using all of his strength, but he can't. He looks like he's trying to back away from his wife. Confused as to what exactly is going on here, Deb looks at the wife and sees her pulling the cart forward and glaring at her husband. Then she looks at Deb, and Deb sees that the woman's eyes are 100% solid black. Freaked out, Deb immediately looks down, then looks at Richard, telling him, "Don't look at that lady's eyes." Without even knowing what the problem is, Richard starts scouting for a new checkout line. He goes a few feet away, finds another line, and motions to Deb to join him. As Deb is hurrying to join Richard, get as far away from that woman as she can, Richard can't help but steal a glance at the woman's eyes. Once they're all checked out and back to their truck, Richard says, "I looked at that old lady's eyes. I saw about a third of one of her eyes from the side. It was solid black." Keep in mind, Deb didn't tell him what she saw, so Richard is just confirming for her that she's not crazy. Deb says looking back on this encounter, she feels really bad for the old man. Richard wishes he had thought to stop and say a prayer for the woman, but both of them say they were just way too freaked out to even think about anything except getting out of there. And that includes the thought of taking a picture. Deb says it's just like all those people who never remember to take a picture of Bigfoot. At that moment, it was absolutely the furthest thing from her mind. I bet all those people who make the meme videos about Walmart shoppers never saw anything like that. I'm sure glad I haven't. But our next encounter shows us that things that look scary aren't necessarily always bad. The in-betweener for this next story also would like to remain anonymous, so we're going to call him Sean. Most of his early life, Sean lived in a house on Shelbyville Road in Indianapolis, Indiana, that still stands there today. He still remembers the gigantic yard they had to play in, and that it was right down the road from a gated community with a pond where all of the ducks and geese would come over to their yard every single day at the very same time, like clockwork. However, the house was not quite as idyllic on the inside as it was on the outside. He remembers lots of unexplainable things happening, but most memorably was the old-time radio that played throughout the house, except it was so faint that no one could quite really tell what was playing or pinpoint where it was coming from. And the disembodied voices. It sounded like a mother and son having a conversation, but no one could ever quite make out what they were saying. Everyone could hear them, and Sean's mom did her best to normalize the situation for her already freaked out kids. But then things get a little more real for Sean. In this particular house, at night, it gets super hot in his room. And Sean sleeps with a nightlight, which casts an orange glow all throughout the room, so he can pretty much see everything at least a little. His room gets so hot that it makes it hard for him to sleep. So many nights, he just lies there for a while, trying to forget the heat so he can fall asleep. And each night that he has a hard time falling asleep, he feels more and more like he's not alone, and not in a good way. On this particular night, Sean is just lying there, tossing and turning, again, having a really hard time falling asleep because it's so hot. And he's just about to doze off when he hears heavy breathing coming from the other side of the room behind him. He just lies there for what feels like an eternity, just listening to this deep, raspy breathing sound. He shuts his eyes tight and starts to pray, just hoping that might make it go away. But instead, the breathing sound starts getting closer. Sean starts praying and wishing even harder, but the breathing keeps getting closer and louder. He has his own special comfort blankets on the bed with him, so he grabs them, wraps himself up in them, hoping this comfort barrier will keep whatever nightmare this is away. But it doesn't work. As he lies there, sweating underneath these blankets, he hears the breathing getting closer and closer. And just as it seems this thing must be right over his bed, everything goes silent just for a moment. Sean opens his eyes, thinking he has to be dreaming, but the breathing starts up again right behind him. He musters the courage to take a peek, rolls over, and sees a woman standing over him with long, stringy blonde hair that covers most of her face. She doesn't look like a ghostly apparition. She looks like something solid, like a real person standing in his room. Nightlight in the room is casting shadows on her face, so he can't really see her features, but he can see her just standing there staring at him, still making those raspy breathing sounds. Sean rolls back over, burrows back under the blankets, slams his eyes shut, and starts praying again, hoping this time it'll work. He has no idea how long he's lying there, pleading for divine intervention, when he notices the breathing has gone away, or at least for another moment. It starts right back up again, but this time it's further away, like all the way across the room over by his door. Oh man, it's in front of the door. He steels himself and takes another peek. Yup, it's right in front of his door. There's no escape. What he does next, Sean can only guess, is the sum of a level of fear so high, added to a complete loss of hope, which ended up equaling just a little bit of bravery. He grabs his comfort blankets and holds them in front of him like a shield of protection, jumps out of bed, runs past the creepy woman, through the door, and straight into his mom's room. His mom is jolted awake by Sean screaming about some ghost woman, and Sean does not sleep in his room again for at least 2 weeks. Looking back on the incident through the lens of time, Sean believes the woman he saw was the mother they could hear talking to her son. Maybe she just wanted to be close to a little boy like hers one more time. No, thank you. Never ceases to amaze me that people can grow up to be perfectly functioning adults after having experienced things like that as a kid. But ethereal being encounters are not the only things out there that can leave a mark on a kid's psyche. This story comes to us from Monkzilla, so we're just going to call him Mike. When Mike is 12 or 13 years old, so around 2002, 2003, he lives with his grandfather who, unfortunately, spends his days in a wheelchair. Mike, being the creative young boy that he is, starts using this to his advantage. Dawns on him that if he misses the school bus, he gets to stay home because there's no one there to drive him to school. So he starts coming up with all kinds of excuses as to why he's missing the bus, from homeless people messing with him to mean older bullies, all of them complete fiction. One particular day, after creating yet another excuse to stay home, Mike decides to go visit a friend a few blocks away that he just happens to know is also not at school that day. So Mike jumps on his bike that's way too small and slow for him and heads out to his friend's house. As he pulls onto the street where his friend lives, a huge shadow engulfs him. He looks up and sees the largest bird he has ever seen flying right over his head. Mike thinks, this is impossible. This bird has to be at least 2 school buses long. Flies to a tree across the street, hugging the side of it, but it's so big it can't fit in the tree. Visions of unsuspecting mice being picked up right off the ground by opportunistic hawks flood Mike's head, quickly followed by the thought that with this thing, he might just be the mouse. The bike he's on is way too small and slow to be of any help in this situation, so he ditches the bike and runs all the way home, waiting the whole time to feel the giant talons digging into his back. He gets brave enough to look over his shoulder a couple of times, but he doesn't see it again. He comes crashing through the front door of his house and immediately spills the entire terrifying scene to Grandpa. Grandpa, considering all of the storytelling that Mike has been doing lately, of course, doesn't believe him at first, but eventually softens his stance when he sees just how shaken up Mike is. Grandpa says, "Probably wasn't really as big as you think it was." But Mike knows what he saw and doesn't ever want to go outside again. The very next morning, Mike refuses to go outside to catch the bus, and Grandpa is sure this is just another one of those excuses not to go to school. So he does what any adult would do in that situation and shoos Mike out the door. Not even a minute after Mike gets to the bus stop, he sees the bird again, and it is indeed as enormous as he thought it was. Now, he really doesn't feel like standing out there as bait with this thing flying around, so he immediately turns right around and runs back home, catching the wrath of Grandpa as soon as he walks in the door. But he doesn't care. He knows what he saw, and he doesn't care about the good laugh everyone has at his expense. They don't know what he saw. It isn't until the internet becomes more popular and stories from people just like Mike sharing their experiences of seeing something just like Mike saw start to get published that Mike can finally say, "I told you so." And I thought the gigantic pileated woodpecker pecking at my house was bad enough. I hope to never see what Mike saw. But lest you start to think that all encounters with the paranormal are terror-inducing affairs, I leave you with this story. This story comes from yet another faithful in-betweener who also wants to remain anonymous, so we're just going to call him Chad. Chad, who's from Caboolture, Queensland in Australia, has worked as an RN in an aged care facility in Deception Bay for a while and has had some pretty interesting experiences. But the most interesting by far happened one night about 2 years ago while he was on night duty not long after he started working there. Chad has an older gentleman in his rounds for the night who is in the palliative care stage, so he doesn't have much time left. The man's room is in a secure unit within the hospital reserved for the dementia residents. And part of that security is having sensors on the doorways. So if somebody gets out of bed and wanders out of their room, the hospital staff is immediately notified and can go get them back into bed safely. So Chad checks on him regularly as the hours pass and notices that his breathing pattern has changed to a particular pattern which serves as a heads up to caregivers that death is near. So Chad leaves the man's room and heads to the nurse's station so he can call the man's family to let him know that they might want to come now to say their last goodbyes. As he's looking for the paperwork for the undertaker, he hears the sensor on the man's doorway go off. Well, that's odd. The man has a personal caregiver who was in the room earlier, but then she left to go see another patient. And Chad can see the door of the man's room and hasn't seen the caregiver come back yet. So Chad gets up to go check on him with a little hint of intuition telling him the man has passed on. So he also grabs a stethoscope on his way. When he gets to the door, he sees another staff member coming through the secure door of the unit with the man's daughter. Chad turns off the door sensor and all three enter the room together. Turns out, Chad's intuition was right. The man had indeed passed on. And as Chad's going through the standard end-of-life checks just to make sure, the door sensor goes off again, even though Chad had already turned it off. Must be a glitch. He leaves the room so the man's daughter can have some time to grieve privately while he goes back to the nurse's station to call the undertaker and fill out the paperwork. As he's sitting at the desk, the bed buzzer, the thing that patients can press to call the nurse, goes off 3 times, each time sending Chad to the room to check on the daughter. The daughter tells him, "I haven't touched it." She says it goes off every time she gets up to leave. When she finally does leave, the personal caregiver goes in the room and opens the window in her belief that doing so lets the spirit out. And all is quiet in the room for the rest of the night. Since that night, Chad has put together a theory that would account for all of that strangeness. He thinks that when the man passed away, he came out into the hall to tell Chad he had died, tripping the sensor the first time. After a while, he decides to come back into the room, tripping the sensor the second time to let them know he was back. Not wanting his daughter to leave, he kept triggering the bed buzzer as a way to keep her around for just a little longer. Maybe that open window is exactly what he needed to be able to finally go home.